Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 42nd episode of the Matias Sports Podcast. I have MassLive Red Sox reporter Sean McAdam. How are you, sir?
I'm well, Ken. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Appreciate you coming back on and joining me on my podcast. So, like I said, if you want to speak about your career and how you got to MassLive and what stood out so far in your career of journalism and somewhat broadcasting.
Yeah, it's been kind of a long one. This will be my 44th year, I think,
Oh,
in
wow.
sports media, going all the way back to 1981. I worked in radio in Providence for 4 years, working as a producer, reporter, and fill-in talk show host on WEAN in Providence, which was a news talk format station. I produced a show called Chuck Wilson on Sports. Chuck did sports talk in Providence for a long time and then did some national stuff for both ESPN and Sirius. And he was a great influence and a great mentor for me in the beginning of my career. I always enjoyed writing. And after the radio station was put up for sale and the format changed, I caught on with the Providence Journal and spent better than 20 years there doing everything from covering preps to writing a sports media column to doing some Bruins and Patriots stuff. And then in 1989, that was my first year on the Red Sox beat. And I've been there ever since, although for various platforms. I worked for the Journal until 2009, 2008 or 9. Spent a year at the Boston Herald. After that, spent about 7 years at Comcast Sportsnet New England, which is now NBC Sports Boston.
Hmm.
From there, a number of years at Boston Sports Journal. And in May of 2023, I joined MassLive, where I am a supervising reporter and columnist and kind of oversee the Red Sox beat for MassLive, working with Chris Smith and Chris Cotillo. And it's been great. You know, I wish I had made this move earlier. It's a fantastic place to work. It's a great staff. We've been expanding, which is very rare in sports media at this point. You see a lot of whether it be websites or newspapers or any news organizations, many more are contracting rather than expanding, and yet they hired me along with Karen Garigian, who
Hmm.
is a longtime friend, and she oversees the Patriots beat. So it's great to be part of a fantastic team at Mass Live. We're growing and proud to be there.
No, that's awesome. I know I've had a good friendship. I haven't met Chris in person, but Chris Cotillo, I've taken his class. I've texted with him, and you and him do the podcast on the Sox, and you guys do a great job. So, I mean, I
Oh,
appreciate
thank you.
yeah, no problem. I appreciate what you guys do. I don't know Chris Smith. I've never met him, but like I say, I talk to Chris here and there. He tries to give me advice. He wants me to reach out to players and stuff like that because I'd love to get him on my podcast, but it's easier said than done because I don't know. It's just being in the media world. I feel like it's just like you got a little more connections working at a Mass Live, the Herald, the Globe, where you
Sure.
can reach out to the team and athletes, and it's like, hey, like, can you come on my podcast and do this? But I understand he's been like a big pusher of that. He's like, try to get a minor league player or any kind of players. But speaking about your career, like, what stood out in the 44, 45 years of being in the industry from covering the Patriots, the Bruins, and obviously the Red Sox for like 35, 36 years?
Well, obviously, the industry's changed a
Hmm.
great deal in those 40 plus years. When I began, there was mercifully no such thing as social media,
Yep.
which is the bane of some of our existence now. It's sometimes more trouble than it's worth, but we also understand it's part of the landscape now, and it's a way to promote your work. So you have to work within that framework. Um, but it's a completely different era. When I first started, when I was working for the Providence Journal in the 1980s, if you had a story by yourself, you kind of crossed your fingers and waited to see the next morning whether any other competitors, newspapers, there were no websites at the time, had the same story you did. Now we live in a 24-hour news cycle where the minute you find something and confirm it, you want to get it out there to the world on social media, on whatever platform you're working for. So it's night and day. You would think in some ways that the job hasn't changed that much, and to a degree that's true. Your job is to report on the team, keep up to date on what's going on, chronicle various roster moves, personnel moves, changes in the organization. In the most basic sense, that hasn't changed, but the delivery and the entire media environment has changed a great deal in those 40 years, where you're kind of constantly on the clock. If you find out something at 8 a.m. or 11 p.m., it's your job uh, to get that news out, regardless of time of day or what the next edition might be or any of that, the way that there used to be, very different parameters when I first started out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Obviously, you feel like you said, you're on the clock. So if there's a story that breaks 2, 3 in the morning and you're sleeping, I mean, how's that usually work? Do you just wake up and like either tweet or, confirm the source or whatever it
Yeah,
is?
I mean, a
Or
few weeks ago, maybe a month and a half ago now, I posted a story about 3 a.m. about
yeah.
the Red Sox meeting with Juan Soto and his representatives in Southern California. And I got a text well after, I think, 1:15 or 1:30, um, spoke to a source, and I'm here at my kitchen table at 2:30 in the morning writing a story and putting it up on the website at 3 o'clock. So it doesn't matter what time of day is. It's as I said, it's a 24-hour news cycle, and you have to respond accordingly.
Oh yeah, for sure. Obviously, you're always going to be, looking for the breaking news and stuff like that. And one thing I did want to mention too, like in your 40, 45 years in the industry, how's like if you have kids or raising a family, how was it having kids, a wife? Because, my wife and I just had our little guy in October, so obviously
Oh,
he's
congratulations.
thank you, I appreciate it. He's going to be about 4 months in a couple weeks. So how's like the whole family life with your
Yeah,
career?
that's always a delicate balance.
Hmm.
When I first started out, I had two uh, young children, and thankfully at the time I was sharing the beat with somebody else.
Hmm.
The When I was at the Providence Journal, we did cover the team on the road, home and away. But at least, for every week or 10-day road trip that you took, you got the next one off. But it certainly requires a lot of juggling and a lot of patience and a lot of prioritizing. It's not unlike many other jobs where you have demands on your time, and yet you're trying to be a dad and a husband, and be aware of those responsibilities. And this is not even then, without that 24-hour news cycle, it's not a 9 to 5 type of job.
No, it's not.
But it would, there were advantages to it. I would get home at 1 o'clock in the morning from a night game at Fenway and do the middle of the night feeding because I was already up,
Hmm.
and my wife could sleep and get up with the kids in the morning. So, there was a lot of juggling and a lot of shared responsibilities and trying to make everything work. And it wasn't always easy, but I think every job has its challenges in that way.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, no matter if it's a 9 to 5 or a 24-hour news cycle like you guys are, because I know Chris doesn't have kids, but Chris Smith has kids, right?
Yes, he does. He has two small kids.
Yeah, so obviously it's going to be, a challenge for everybody that's got kids with their profession, but obviously when you're going on the road, going to Seattle or, that road trips in California, usually obviously you're away from your family for about a week, week and a half. So
Yep.
how's that usually work being, transitioning to being on the road? And then do you guys travel with the team too? Like you guys take flights, you guys just take like separate flights and then just kind of meet up with the
No,
team
we
at a
we travel
hotel?
on our own.
Yeah.
When I first started, there were some uh, there were some reporters who traveled on the team charter. That was an option back then. Teams did it as a courtesy. Of course, you were charged for it.
Yeah.
Um, but particularly if you worked for what was then a PM or afternoon paper, the late, great Nick Cafardo, who
Yep.
covered the Red Sox for so long, when I first was on the beat, Nick was working for the Quincy Patriot Ledger. And as an afternoon paper, his deadlines were different. So he sometimes traveled with the team. As I said, that was an option in the industry then. It was extended as a courtesy. That no longer exists. Now there is very much a separation of church and state. And I'm fine with that. I never traveled with the team.
Hmm.
I've taken exactly one charter flight in my entire career. That was about 15 years ago when I was at the Herald. The Bruins were traveling to St. Louis in the winter when there was a blizzard due, and they offered at the time there were only two traveling uh, members of the Bruins beat when I was filling in, and they offered again as a courtesy the chance to travel with them because they didn't believe we would be able to get out on a uh, on a commercial
Hmm.
flight the next morning. So I flew from Bedford to St. Louis with the team on the charter. But that is literally the one charter flight I've taken in 40 plus years. Most of the time, we make our own arrangements, make our own flights. And of course, your news organization is responsible for those costs. But,
Yeah.
that's part of it. Some of the some aspects of travel can be fun. It's nice to visit other cities. It's nice to see parts of the country that you otherwise might not have exposure to. I have some high school friends on the West Coast that I like to catch up with when I'm in that area. See some family here and there across the country. Um, we all have our list, or at least I do, of favorite restaurants on the road and
Hmm.
hotels that we like to stay at, and get into a bit of a routine on the road. But it's a grind too. You're you're finishing up work at midnight. You're getting to sleep at 2 a.m. You're getting up at 6 o'clock for a 7:30 flight, and it's on to the next city. Thankfully, both Chris Smith, Chris Cotillo, and I kind of chop up the travel schedule.
Hmm.
So none of us is being overburdened and doing 81 road games. There have been years in my past when I did close to that, and
Wow.
that's a real grind.
Yeah, it is.
And really, nobody does that anymore. When I was first coming up, um, it was again a different environment, but there were some older reporters who would do just about every road game, and then would often get the entire off season off with some other people helping out. It was a much different beat to cover back then. There was not nearly as much off-season activity as there is now.
Hmm.
Free agency existed, but not to the extent it does now. And you kind of covered the winter meetings, and that's where 80% of the off-season activity took place. Now you could have a free agent signing, a trade, an arbitration hearing. It seems like every day there's the potential for some news in the off-season.
Yeah, it's
And
like,
in many ways, that's where you sort of earn your stripes in the off season because there's news to break and there's
hmm.
news to get out ahead of. They're talking about this free agent or they're engaged with this team about this trade possibility. within the context of the season, you're covering games, and there isn't necessarily a ton of breaking news during the year, but there's a lot of breaking news to cover in the off season. So in that regard, that's one more example again of how the beat has completely changed and the expectations that surround it.
Yeah, it's usually basically from what the final out of the World Series to like maybe Christmas, early to mid-January is like when the hot stove really heats up because Juan Soto, didn't he sign around like Christmas with the Mets, give or take? It might have been a few weeks before that,
Yeah,
but
it was at the very start of the
winter
winter
meetings, right?
meetings,
Yeah.
about 10 days into December. But there have been years, as you know, in recent years, where some of the top free agents haven't signed until February or even March. So,
Hmm.
um, I think that's an issue that baseball needs to address. I think when you look at free agency in football, basketball, or hockey, you know, first day of free agency, three-quarters of the players come off the board.
Hmm.
Players are signed within a couple of hours of the beginning of free agency. And baseball, unfortunately, for everyone involved, has it drag out far longer. And I suspect a lot of that has to do with baseball not having a salary cap while the other three sports do. There's only so much money to spend in those sports. People don't want to be caught without filling some roster needs, so they
Yep.
act quickly and aggressively. Whereas in baseball, um, much like the game itself, there's no time limit and things tend to get stretched out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. I never thought about it because obviously when NFL free agency hits in about a month, month and a half, it's usually they got the tampering period and then they got the official date, and those guys already
Right.
signed in the tampering period. And usually baseball, usually excuse me, the NBA and NHL, it's usually pretty quickly too.
Mm-hmm.
But why do you think like the MLB just kind of rides out the whole offseason from like October, November to like February for these guys to sign? Do they just want to play the field on the money game, or they just want to see what's the best destination for them and their families?
Yeah, well, I think I'm not sure that there's an easy answer to it. I think the lack of a salary cap
Hmm.
is a contributing factor. It takes away that sense of urgency that, hey, if we don't get this guy, he's going to go someplace else quickly. Baseball tends to be more of a waiting game.
Yep.
Teams want to wait out the agents. Agents want to create um, a sense of competition among teams for their clients, let a bidding war develop, and the longer it drags out, sometimes the greater the contract turns out to be. So that's one. I also think baseball has, I think you could make a case that the reliance on analytics has been a contributing factor. Everybody is now dealing with the same data points, the same numbers, the same analytics, and everyone in their mind has what a player is worth. They don't want to jump the gun and overspend on a player early, so they have kind of parameters that they're willing to wait out. The agents, on the other hand, have in their mind what the value for their clients are, and they're determined to get it, and they're willing to wait to see if that happens. So you get kind of a staring contest, and that's when you get into February and March with a lot of these guys still unsigned.
And a prime example of that, I know he's been rumored to the Sox for like the past month and a half, 2 months, is what's the deal with Alex Bregman? Is he going to stay in Houston or is he going to take a short? I know he wants a long-term deal from according to reports from what I've seen, but what's the status with Bregman now?
Yeah, I'm not sure where he's going to go, but I'm fairly certain it's not going to be here.
Hmm.
I think if the Red Sox wanted that to happen, it would have happened a while ago. There have been reports in the last week or so that say that they have made an offer for 4 years, but don't want to go beyond that. And while they could certainly use his bat and his glove, I understand holding the line there. I know
Hmm.
Red Sox fans are uh, wanting to add another bat to the middle of that lineup, particularly a right-handed one. But there are some troubling signs about the trajectory of Bregman's career. He's starting to decline a little bit offensively the last few years. And I think it's worth wondering what kind of player he's going to be at 36, 37, 38, which is
Hmm.
where he'd be if you offered him a 5, 6, or 7 year deal. So he could go back to Houston. He could go to Toronto, Detroit. Seems a number of teams in on him. He's probably the best free agent, at least best position player free agent still on the market. I think he will get a deal of probably 6 years. Maybe it'll have some opt outs. But as I said, at this point, um, I'd be very surprised if he ended up in a Red Sox uniform. And I wrote during the winter meetings that there was some, um, internal disagreement over the value of Bregman. I know that Alex Cora, having worked with him in 2017
Hmm.
when he was the Astros bench coach, has been a big proponent of signing Bregman. He wants him, but I think there are people, including Craig Breslow, who are um, understandably a little reluctant to commit to a real long-term deal and have drawn the line. And it's likely he's going to better that deal elsewhere.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously he's not like the Soto case of 25, 26 years old. I mean, he'd probably be signed already if he was in like the one Soto
Sure.
range. I mean, you're looking at what the right side or the downhill side of 30, I guess. I mean, obviously players play in their 30s, they become DHs, they still play the position, like kudos to them. But sticking obviously with the free agency or at least the Red Sox talk, like what was your initial reaction when they decided to trade obviously their prospects and Kyle Teal for Garrett Crochet? I know it was much needed for the rotation. I was kind of hesitant because I'm like, I don't know enough about this guy, and obviously the White Sox kind of limited his innings last season. So what was like your initial reaction when they traded their top prospect catcher of the future at least?
Yeah. I thought it was a good trade. It's not easy to go get a number one
Hmm.
starting pitcher or a guy of that caliber. And I understand that Crochet hasn't done it for a long period of time, principally because of some health issues. He had Tommy John surgery a couple of years ago. The White Sox were understandably, as you noted, very careful about his workload this past year. They limited him, particularly in the second half, to no more than 4 innings in some of those starts. So this is a guy who has not pitched more than 150 innings in a season. But if you look under the hood a little bit at the quality of the stuff, the strikeout per 9 inning rate, the hard hit rate, some of the analytics that are very important. It's a lot easier, I think, evaluators in baseball will tell you to look at some of those numbers for a pitcher than it is for a hitter.
Hmm.
And he has all the makings of really an ace pitcher. And to get one of those guys at 25 years old, even without the track record, you have to pay. And the Red Sox did. They gave up 4 pretty good prospects, including 2 of their top 5, not just Kyle Teal, but also Braden Montgomery, their number
Hmm.
one pick from a year ago,
Yep.
a guy who has perhaps the potential to be a five-tool player with a corner outfield arm. But that's the price of doing business. If you're going to go out and get a real front of the rotation starter, as Crochet is, you're going to have to pay for it. There's one of two ways to do it. One is to sign a player like that in free agency when ordinarily they're by definition going to be a little older because you've got to
Hmm.
have your 6 years in at the big league level. That makes most free agent starters like that 28, 29, 30 years old. And now when you're talking about giving them a 6, 7, or 8 year deal, you're getting a pitcher into his late 30s. When you trade for somebody like Crochet, um, then you get more of the meat of the prime of his career. So if they were to extend Crochet, as they're surely going to try to do here in the next couple of weeks or 2 months,
Hmm.
you're buying out the rest of his 20s into his early 30s, and the risk is less in terms of physical injuries. Although, given that he's already had Tommy John in his early 20s, that's a reminder that it can happen at any point during his career. But generally speaking, uh, pitchers are healthier and more durable in their 20s, which is why it's going to cost the Red Sox a lot of money to get them extended. But that's something they absolutely have to do, having given up so much young talent to get them. If they only get those 2 years of control remaining that he has right now, then it's a bad trade for them because they gave up too much for only 2 seasons. So the onus is on them to get him extended and wrapped up and under control well into his 30s.
So him being probably the top of the rotation, do you see him probably being the opening day starter once they start the season? Or could it be like another Bayo, Hauk, you got Giolito coming back, and obviously the recently signed month and a half ago, Walker Buehler on that 1 year, $21 million contract. So out of those guys, who you think it's going to be Crochet right out the gate?
I would imagine
Yeah.
as long as he's healthy, Crochet will
Hmm.
get the nod. March 27th in Arlington, Texas, against the Rangers. Anything can happen in spring training. We see some setbacks. A guy has a hamstring pull or a little twinge somewhere,
Hmm.
and they hold him out. He doesn't get a chance to build up the number of innings that you might like to get ready for the start of the season. But barring anything unforeseen, yeah, I would expect Crochet will be the opening day starter.
What was your opinion on them signing Walker Buehler? I mean, 30, I mean, he's had a pretty good career with obviously the Dodgers winning two World Series and stuff, and obviously striking out Verdugo to end the recent World Series. But what was your thoughts and opinion on getting a guy that's 30?
Yeah, I like that. In fact, we at MassLive we made some predictions at the start of the offseason, and one of the few ones I got right was that they were going to sign Walker Buehler to a short-term deal, and indeed they did. I think it's a nice add to the rotation. It's a guy with championship pedigree. He's
Hmm.
been part of a couple of World Series staffs. He's pitched in a big market. He's been successful. And because he's coming off that second Tommy John surgery, the he perhaps didn't have the ability to go out and get a long-term deal. So this is kind of one of those pillow deals where you make good on the 1 year and see where it takes you. But I thought it was a nice addition to a rotation that is mostly pretty young at this point. When you look at Bayo and Hauk and Crawford, they're all 26, 27 years old. Last year was really the first year that all three got through the entire year and made 30 starts. And it's not a bad thing to bring somebody in with a little more experience to sort of act as a leader or a mentor for that group. So I thought bringing in Bueller was a smart move.
No, definitely that veteran presence to that young rotation, like you mentioned. And then obviously staying with the team. I know I'm jumping around because we got a few minutes here, but what's your thoughts on Kristen Campbell and maybe Roman Anthony and Marcelo Meyer making maybe the opening day roster or maybe just starting in AAA and then working their way up?
Yeah, I think we can take Meyer out of that equation. He's not
Yeah.
had an at bat at AAA. He did get promoted there last summer, but because he was dealing with that back issue, he didn't play the rest of the
Mhm.
way. So that would be highly out of character for the Red Sox to sort of double jump somebody from essentially AA to AAA. Um, for another, there's no obvious spot for Meyer to take over. You've
Hmm.
got Trevor Story at short. So I would expect Meyer certainly will start the year at AAA Worcester. I would say the same about Roman Anthony, who's a great talent and is regarded by most evaluators now as the best position player prospect in the game.
Hmm.
But again, there's no obvious spot for him to claim. You've got Duran in left, you've got Raphael in center, and you got Abreu in right. Eventually, they're going to have to find a place for Anthony to play because he's too good not to. But I
Hmm.
think they'll take the opportunity to let him develop further, maybe for a couple of months. My guess is we might see him around the 1st of June, Memorial Day, and around that area. I think Campbell has actually a decent shot of breaking camp
Hmm.
with the team, and that's because there is a potential opening in the lineup for him at second base. He's played there both in college and in the Red Sox system. He played there a lot last year at Portland and Worcester, so he's familiar with the position. And there isn't anybody established who's claimed that spot. You still have Vaughn Grissom, who's in the running. You still have David Hamilton, who's in the running. But you don't have, you're not, you don't have an established major leaguer in that spot. And there is some incentive for the Red Sox to start the year with Campbell in the big leagues. It used to be that teams were very cognizant of not starting a player's service time clock until a few weeks into the season, because then uh, that player would not be credited with a full year of service time, and you would get 6 3/4 seasons of service time
Hmm.
and control before he's eligible for free agency. That still exists, but as part of the collective bargaining agreement a few years ago, if a player if a rookie starts the year on a big league roster and finishes in the top uh, three of rookie of the year or the top five of MVP voting, then that team is rewarded with an extra draft pick
Oh, wow.
the following July. So that was introduced to sort of limit service time manipulation on the part of the clubs.
Hmm.
So if you think that Christian Campbell is really going to be an impact rookie and you're trying to decide, well, do we start the season with him or do we wait a few weeks? The incentive of landing a bonus draft pick, should he play as well as you expect him to be, is there, and that could be a determining factor.
Yeah, I'm hoping to see him eventually on the roster. I mean, I kind of spacing out on Vaughn Grissom because obviously we traded for him with the Chris Sale deal. But one final takeaway: what's your thoughts on Vaughn Grissom on possibly maybe making the opening day roster? I know he battled injuries last year.
Yeah, it was kind of a lost year for him, obviously. He got hurt in spring training, missed all of spring training. When he finally was healthy, he didn't play well at the major league
Mhm.
level. I think they were maybe unhappy with some of his preparation and conditioning. So it was kind of a humbling year for him. He went back down to AAA after being the guy that everyone thought was going to be the everyday second baseman. And he kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit. But in the second half of the year, I think he responded well. I think there was kind of an attitude change that they enjoyed seeing. And when he came back to them in late August and September, he played far better. So he's in the mix. It's not as if Campbell is going to be handed the job at
Mhm.
second at the start of the year. And it certainly would not be a shock if Grissom landed that position and they sent Campbell back to Worcester for a little bit. Um, but it is kind of a make or break year for him. This is a guy for whom there were great expectations, and now he's got to make good on that and reclaim his position in the organization.
No, I appreciate that, and I thank you for being a guest on my podcast. I really do.
I enjoyed it, Ken. Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me.